My name is Ashley Bennett. I'm 26 years old, born and raised in Charleston, South Carolina. And for most of my life, I've been the shadow in the room, the girl who was always there, always trying, but somehow never quite enough. Not in the eyes of my family. I was the second child, the quiet one, the creative one, the disappointment if we're being honest. My older brother Logan was everything my parents ever wanted in a child. Tall, handsome, brilliant. Quarterback of his high school team, graduated valedictorian, went to a top-tier university, and got a job at a financial firm right after. He was the golden boy. Our family Christmas cards might as well have been Logan's resume, printed in gold foil. I was the afterthought. A blurry background figure, half cropped out of every photo. Let me know if you've ever felt overlooked or underestimated. Drop it in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe to see how I turned years of silence into a voice the world couldn't ignore. It wasn't that I was a bad kid. I got decent grades, I was polite, I stayed out of trouble. But I liked to draw. I liked to build things. I'd spend hours tinkering with Photoshop or sketching mock-up websites in notebooks. My room was filled with wires, notebooks, and coffee mugs. To my parents, that wasn't work. That was Ashley playing pretend on the computer. I still remember the day I told them I wanted to study digital design. My dad scoffed and said, "That's not a real job. Maybe as a side gig. You'll see." My mom suggested I consider something more practical, maybe nursing or teaching. Something with structure, something people respect. That word stuck with me. Respect. It was something I never earned from them, no matter what I did. At 18, I moved out with barely $400 in my bank account and a laptop that froze every 30 minutes. I enrolled in a state college in Atlanta with a partial scholarship. My parents came to drop me off, but they didn't help me unpack. They hugged me briefly and left before sunset. No tears, no encouragement. Just a quick goodbye and a warning. Don't expect us to bail you out when it all falls apart. They thought it would. And honestly, so did I. Those first 2 years were brutal. I worked late-night shifts at a diner to cover rent. I took on every small freelance gig I could get, designing birthday invitations, social media banners, logos for $20 a pop. There were days I survived on instant noodles and dollar store cereal, but I kept going. Every client taught me something. Every mistake sharpened my skill. Slowly, I built a portfolio. A real one. By junior year, I was getting bigger projects. Startups, indie game developers, even a small publishing company. I started building a name, but not under mine. I created a studio alias, Third Layer. It sounded abstract, modern, and mysterious. Everything I wasn't allowed to be growing up. I wanted the work to speak louder than my name ever could. By the time I was 24, I had clients in 3 countries. I had a team of 3 remote artists working under me. I had savings, I had freedom, and yet, I had no relationship with my family. I barely visited. I stopped calling. I couldn't bear the subtle jabs, the forced conversations, the way they'd brag about Logan's new car or promotion while pretending not to hear me mention my latest project. The last time I went home was for Christmas, 2 years ago. Logan had just proposed to his girlfriend Claire, and my parents were ecstatic. She was the picture of perfection. Sweet, elegant, educated, and from a well-known family. Of course they adored her. That night at the dinner table, I mentioned offhandedly that one of my designs was featured in a national tech blog. My mom blinked and asked if that was one of those internet magazines. My dad nodded but said nothing. Logan changed the subject. I left early, before dessert. I cried in the car. Not because I was hurt, but because I realized I didn't feel like I belonged anymore. Maybe I never had. Then, last spring, Logan called me out of the blue. He and Claire were having their official engagement dinner in Charleston and wanted me to be there. He said it like it was some big gesture. I didn't answer right away. Part of me wanted to decline, to protect myself, but something in his voice felt different. So I said yes. I spent a week deciding what to wear. Isn't that pathetic? I wasn't dressing for attention. I just wanted to be taken seriously. For once. I chose a sleek black jumpsuit, simple gold earrings, and a leather portfolio case. Not because I thought anyone would ask about my work, but because carrying it made me feel like I mattered. The dinner was held at a trendy restaurant in downtown Charleston. Tall ceilings, exposed brick, jazz playing low in the background. Claire greeted me with genuine warmth. She gave me a long hug and told me she was so happy I came. That caught me off guard. We sat. Toasts were made. Everyone was laughing and talking and taking photos. At some point, Claire leaned over to me and asked what I was working on lately. I gave her my usual vague answer. Digital design, some AR content, app interfaces. Her eyes lit up. I love AR, she said. Our company just launched an interactive storytelling app with AR overlays. The design is incredible. Everyone keeps asking who made it, but the artist used a studio name, Third Layer. My heart stuttered. She kept talking. It's seriously breathtaking. You can move your phone around and the illustrations shift with it. And the transitions between story scenes. It's like watching a dream. The color work, the mood, it's next level. I couldn't speak. I didn't need to. Claire opened her phone and pulled up the app. And there it was. My work. My signature style. The animated page turns. The layered sound effects. The glowing outlines that shimmered when you moved your screen just right. She tapped through a few scenes like a kid showing off her favorite toy. Then, she looked up. Her eyes locked on mine. Wait, you created this? The table fell silent. All the clinking of forks, the idle chatter, the laughter, it vanished. My mother looked confused. My father stared, unsure. Logan looked stunned. I swallowed. Yeah, that was my studio's project. I directed it. Claire gasped. Ashley, oh my God, this is revolutionary. Do you know how many investors have been talking about the design? It's the most downloaded AR story app this quarter. I smiled, barely. I wanted to scream, cry, run, all at once. Because in that moment, for the first time in my life, the people around that table saw me. Not as Logan's quiet sister. Not as the artsy one with her head in the clouds. They saw what I had built, what I had become, without them. But they didn't know the full story. They didn't know that every glowing scene in that app held something personal. That the girl in the story, abandoned, underestimated, dismissed, was me. That every moment of triumph in that narrative was a tribute to the pain I carried through my entire life. And as they stared in disbelief, as my mother asked softly, "Why didn't you tell us?" and my father shifted uncomfortably in his seat, I realized something. This wasn't the climax. This was only the beginning. Because sometimes revenge doesn't come in shouting or slamming doors. Sometimes it comes in the quiet realization that you no longer need their permission to shine. The next morning after the engagement dinner, I woke up in my hotel room still processing the stunned expressions from the night before. There was something deeply satisfying about the silence that had followed Claire's question. For once, the silence wasn't because no one cared. It was because they were speechless. And yet, underneath that satisfaction was something else. Anger. Not the explosive kind, but the kind that simmers low and steady. The kind that's been building for years. I walked to a cafe a few blocks from the hotel. I needed space, coffee, and clarity. As I sipped a bitter Americano and stared out at the Charleston streets, memories kept flooding back. Every time they called Logan brilliant and me imaginative, like it was a polite way to say irrelevant. Every time they asked Logan about his career and then turned to me and said, "Still doing your little design thing?" I realized that last night wasn't vindication. It was just the first crack in the facade. Logan called later that afternoon. I didn't answer. He texted instead, "Can we talk before you leave town?" I stared at the message for a while. Part of me wanted to ignore it, pack my things, and disappear again. But something made me respond. "Sure, just coffee. Nothing formal." He agreed. We met at a small place by the river, quiet and tucked away. He looked different, less polished than usual, more real. We sat, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "I had no idea you were doing that kind of work. Why didn't you ever tell me?" I laughed bitterly. "Tell you? Logan, I've been talking about my work since we were teenagers. You just never listened. He winced. That's not fair. No? I leaned forward. Every single time I tried to share something, you dismissed it. Mom and Dad dismissed it. You guys were too busy celebrating your job offers and promotions. I was building a company from nothing, while you all treated me like a failed experiment. He looked down. I'm sorry. I didn't expect that. It wasn't defensive. It was real. I always felt like you had everything, I continued. Support, encouragement, respect. I had to create those things for myself. Logan nodded slowly. You're right. I think I was so focused on making Mom and Dad proud that I didn't stop to see how they treated you. That's on me too. I felt something shift between us. A long overdue honesty. Still, it didn't erase the years of neglect. It didn't fix the silence, the erasure, the isolation. I didn't come here for an apology, I said. I came because I needed to see if any of you were capable of seeing me. He looked up. And? I think Claire is. That made him laugh. She's always been better at that than the rest of us. We parted on good terms, but I left that coffee shop with a decision. I wasn't done. That app Claire loved? It was only the beginning. I had been working on something far bigger, something bolder, an interactive experience built around the idea of emotional inheritance. How families pass down not just traditions and heirlooms, but silence, favoritism, shame. It was personal, raw, and I'd been afraid to release it, but not anymore. 2 months later, I launched it. The project was called Invisible Lines. It wasn't just an app. It was an experience, a visual journey through a family dinner where the user navigated a role much like mine. Quiet, overlooked, trying to be heard. Each interaction revealed more of the hidden emotions behind each family member's silence. The ending changed depending on how assertive the player was. The deeper you explored, the more truths were uncovered. Painful, beautiful, and everything in between. I didn't advertise it under third layer. This time, I used my real name, and it blew up. It started with indie art forums, then tech blogs, then mental health influencers. People wrote essays about how they saw themselves in the story, how it made them cry, how it healed something they hadn't even known was broken. Within a month, it had 1 million downloads. Then came the emails, awards, invitations to speak at conferences, interviews, and finally, a call from a major streaming platform. They wanted to license the idea for an interactive series. But the most surprising message came from Claire. She sent a long email, heartfelt, vulnerable. She wrote about how invisible lines made her think differently about her own family dynamics, about the way Logan sometimes unconsciously mirrored his parents. She told me she'd never realized how much I had been carrying. She thanked me for sharing something so raw. She also asked if I'd be willing to help design the interface for a nonprofit she was launching, something focused on mental health resources for young women in tech. I was stunned. I replied, "Let's talk." Meanwhile, my parents stayed silent. I wasn't surprised. Not really. I knew they'd seen the project. Logan would have told them. But they didn't call, didn't email, didn't say a word, until I was invited to speak at a local creative leadership event in Charleston. My name was on the poster, my photo. Ashley Bennett, founder of Third Layer and creator of Invisible Lines. That's when it happened. My mother showed up. I saw her in the back of the auditorium. Her expression was unreadable. I continued my talk, kept my voice steady, told my story, not the sugar-coated one, but the truth, about being overlooked, about creating from pain, about turning silence into strength. When it ended, there was a standing ovation. I stepped down, and there she was, waiting. She opened her mouth, but I spoke first. "You never asked what I was building," I said. "But now that you're here, you can experience it for yourself." I handed her a tablet with the app preloaded and walked away. I didn't wait to see her reaction, because by then I had already reclaimed my voice. And this time, no one could take it from me. Not even the family who once swore I'd never amount to anything. 3 days after the leadership event, I flew back to Atlanta, thinking the experience would settle into my memory like a neatly folded chapter. Impactful, but complete. I was wrong. Something had been set in motion that night, and it wasn't just the app, the applause, or even my mother showing up after years of silence. It was the way I walked off that stage. It was the look on her face, equal parts awe and discomfort. For once, I hadn't stood in her house asking for space to breathe. She had come into mine, uninvited, and been forced to listen. It should have felt like enough, but it wasn't. When I got home, the weight of everything pressed in harder than I expected. Maybe it was adrenaline crash. Maybe it was the sudden shift from validation back to the quiet of my studio apartment. But something didn't sit right. I kept replaying her face, those wide eyes, the way she opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. And instead of feeling triumphant, I felt unfinished, not broken, not defeated, but like I'd stepped through a door only to find there was still another one ahead. The next morning, Logan called again. He said Mom had talked to him, that she wanted to speak to me. Face to face, Ash, he said, his voice gentler than I remembered. She's confused, not about what you've done, about what she missed, about herself. I didn't say anything at first, just let the silence hum through the line. Then I asked him something I hadn't said out loud before. Do you think they ever loved me the way they loved you? He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice cracked a little. I don't think they knew how. It was the most honest thing he'd ever said to me. I agreed to meet her. We chose a neutral place, an art gallery downtown where one of my earlier pieces was being exhibited. It was symbolic in a way. She was stepping into my space now, not the other way around. When I arrived, she was already there, standing in front of a massive digital canvas that pulsed softly with motion. It was one of my early works, a depiction of a girl surrounded by outlines of people, parents, teachers, classmates, none of them looking at her. Only the audience could see her glow. My mother didn't turn when I walked in. She stared at the screen like it was a mirror. After a moment, she spoke. I didn't realize it was you, the artist behind all of this. It always was, I said, my voice low. You just weren't looking. She finally turned. Her eyes were red, but dry. I think I was afraid to look, afraid I'd see how much I'd missed. I stood beside her, not close enough to touch, just close enough to see the shadows under her eyes. She looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that went beyond sleep. I told myself you were fine, she said. Independent, strong. I thought if you didn't ask for help, you didn't need it. I didn't ask because I was tired of being ignored, I replied. I stopped expecting support because it hurt less than being disappointed. She nodded slowly. I see that now. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. We just stood there, two women with a canyon between them, both peering over the edge, unsure if it could ever be crossed. But something else happened that week. Something bigger. A tech journalist reached out to me with a simple proposal. They wanted to do a deep dive feature on invisible lines. A full spread, interviews, behind the scenes, my story, my family's story. At first, I hesitated. I didn't want to turn my pain into clickbait. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that Invisible Lines wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to the thousands of people who had messaged me, who had cried with their phones in their hands, who had finally seen themselves in someone's story. And if telling the full truth helped one more person feel less invisible, then I'd do it. The article dropped 2 weeks later. It went viral. Not just because of the app, or the beautiful animations, or the technical innovation. It was the story, the honesty, the rawness. People saw a piece of themselves in it. The overlooked daughter, the underestimated artist, the sibling in the shadow. Emails poured in, invitations to speak at universities, to consult on emotionally driven tech projects, to write a book. But there was one message that stood out among the thousands. It wasn't long, just one sentence. You told my story better than I ever could. And the name at the bottom? Claire. I didn't know what she meant at first, but then she invited me for lunch. We sat in a quiet rooftop cafe. She looked more serious than usual, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her napkin. I read the article, she said. Then I played through your app again, this time with different choices. I saw the other endings, The ones where the character never speaks up, where no one hears her. I nodded. Those are the ones people experience most in real life. She looked up. I think I was one of those people. I saw what happened to you. And I realized it's what happened to my sister too. She told me her sister had always been the weird one in their family. Creative, moody, withdrawn. She never went to college, moved to the West Coast, barely kept in touch. Claire had written her off years ago, and now she couldn't stop thinking about her. She asked for my help. She wanted to create something for her sister. A gift, a bridge. We worked on it together. A small custom app, just a short story, told through layered visuals and voice notes, with a final message that said, "I see you now." Her sister replied the next day, through tears. It was then I realized my work had grown into something much more than art. It had become a weapon, not in the violent sense, but a tool. A way to disrupt the patterns, expose the cracks, and offer a path to healing, or, in some cases, to reckoning. Because not all bridges could be rebuilt, especially not when someone tried to burn them down completely. One morning, about a month later, I got a call from an old college classmate named Miles. He worked for a corporate design firm that specialized in educational tech products. He was excited, breathless. "Ashley, you're not going to believe this. A client just pitched a full rebrand. They want an aesthetic exactly like Invisible Lines. They even used your color palette. But here's the kicker. They said they already found someone to do it. Guess who?" I didn't speak. He said the name anyway. "Your brother." At first, I laughed. I actually thought it was a joke. Logan had never shown interest in tech, in storytelling, in design. He worked in finance. His idea of creativity was choosing a blue tie instead of black. But then Miles sent me the proposal. It was riddled with buzzwords lifted straight from my interviews. Narrative-driven, empathy-based UX, emotional coding. It wasn't just a pitch. It was a theft. I called Logan. No answer. I called again. No answer. The next morning, I sent an email. One sentence, "We need to talk, now." An hour later, he called. He sounded nervous. "Ashley, before you say anything, you tried to sell my work," I said calmly. "You took my voice, stripped it down to marketable pieces, and offered it to the highest bidder. I didn't. It's not like that," he stammered. "They asked me for something similar, and I thought, you thought you could mimic what you never understood." Silence. "I wasn't trying to hurt you," he finally said. "But you did." And that was the moment I knew what came next wasn't about setting boundaries. It was about setting fire. The phone call with Logan played over and over in my head for the rest of that day. I tried to concentrate on work, but my hands trembled over the keyboard. I had spent years trying to build something that reflected the depth of my pain, my resilience, and my quiet strength. And now, the very person whose shadow I had lived in was trying to take that story and repackage it as his own. I wasn't just angry. I felt betrayed in a way I didn't know was still possible. I thought I had left the need for their approval behind. I thought I had finally found peace in the fact that I didn't need my family's validation to matter. But this was different. This wasn't just silence or neglect. It was active erasure, a theft. And the worst part? He probably didn't even understand what he was taking. Logan always saw himself as the one who fixed things, who provided, who made logical choices. But now he was trying to commodify my voice, the voice he had never bothered to hear when we were kids sitting across the dinner table, the one he drowned out with his achievements and golden boy charm. And maybe that's why it stung so much, because I had never expected him to see me, but I never thought he'd try to wear my face either. I closed my laptop and walked out. I didn't know where I was going, only that I needed to move. I walked for hours through the streets of Atlanta, weaving through crowds, ignoring messages, ignoring the sun that was starting to dip into the horizon. I ended up in a place I hadn't visited in years, the art building at my old college. The doors were locked, but I sat outside on the steps, knees drawn to my chest, and watched the sky turn orange and purple. This was where it had all started. The first sketches, the first ideas, the first time I realized I could take pain and turn it into something beautiful. I remembered the feeling of staying up all night in the computer lab, creating digital paintings while the rest of the world slept. No one watching, no one judging. Just me and my work, quietly stitching my story into pixels and lines. I had never done it for applause. I did it to survive. And now someone wanted to turn that survival into a slogan. The next morning, I reached out to a lawyer. Not for revenge, not yet. For protection. I filed for full trademark registration of my studio name, all the associated projects, and began the process of copyright enforcement against any unauthorized replication of my design patterns, language, or structure. The world loved to romanticize the struggling artist, but I had no interest in being a martyr. If Logan wanted to test how serious I was going to show him I wasn't just the little sister anymore. I was the brand. I was the business. And I was the architect of everything he didn't understand. But I didn't stop there. Instead of pulling away, I leaned in harder. I started a series of workshops, not just about design, but about the emotional weight behind it. I created a course called Story as Resistance, where I walked people through how to turn personal wounds into creative power. Survivors of emotional neglect, overlooked children, young women trying to build tech careers in dismissive spaces. They showed up in droves. And every time I spoke in front of them, I saw something shift. Not just in them, in me. I realized I wasn't just reclaiming my voice. I was multiplying it. People started sharing their own invisible lines stories. Some used paint, some used code, some wrote poems or made short films or songs. One teenage girl created a game called Family Dinner, where you try to speak but every option disappears the moment you select it. When I played it, I cried. I knew then that the movement I'd unintentionally sparked couldn't be taken from me, because it didn't belong to just me anymore. Logan could mimic the style. He could parrot the words, but he could never replicate the truth, the community, or the emotional current that ran beneath all of it. That was mine. That was ours. Still, the confrontation had to happen. Claire reached out again, asking if we could meet in private. I knew what it was about. Logan had probably told her some half-truth, and she wanted to hear both sides. Or maybe she already knew, and just needed to confirm what her instincts were telling her. We met at the same rooftop cafe, this time with less warmth between us. She got straight to the point. Did Logan really try to pass off your work as his own? I nodded. He didn't just try. He built a pitch deck using my phrases. Told a client he could deliver something inspired by my app. He didn't credit me once. Claire sighed, rubbing her forehead. I'm sorry. That's not okay. I looked at her steady. Claire, I don't need your apology. I need to know whether you're okay standing next to someone who does that. She didn't answer. Not then. 2 days later, I got a text. I called off the engagement. That single line said more than any phone call could. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I just sat there, letting the words settle. It wasn't about punishment. It was about accountability. Claire had chosen to walk away from a man who saw other people's stories as currency. And in doing so, she'd taken her first step toward reclaiming her own. But Logan wasn't done. I found out through a mutual acquaintance that he was planning to release his own empathy-based storytelling app, a stripped-down version of Invisible Lines with a new name and a similar color scheme. I could have sued immediately. But instead, I did something worse. I built something better. I created a new experience called Echoes We Leave Behind. It was darker, sharper, and unflinching. It guided users through a labyrinth of familial expectations, microaggressions, gaslighting, and silence, ending in a choice, whether to continue the cycle or break it. It was not comforting. It was confrontational. And it was real. I released it for free. And I made sure the entire backstory, the stolen pitches, the fake clone apps, the truth about Logan, was included in the press kit. Within 48 hours, Logan's app was pulled. No one wanted the knockoff. No one wanted a product built on borrowed pain. The world had finally stopped rewarding the voice that had always been the loudest and started listening to the one that had fought to be heard. That night, I sat on my rooftop, sipping wine, staring at the Atlanta skyline glowing softly against the clouds. The city buzzed below, but my world felt still, balanced. I had spent years trying to be seen, and when I finally was, I had feared it wouldn't be enough. That once I had the spotlight, I wouldn't know what to do with it. But now I knew. I wasn't chasing visibility anymore. I was creating mirrors for others to see themselves. And in doing that, I had built something no one, not even Logan, could ever take from me again. The fallout from Logan's failed launch echoed farther than I expected. Word spread quickly through tech circles and design communities. People were talking, and not just in whispers. Industry professionals started examining the ethics of creative plagiarism in a way they never had before. Podcasts, think pieces, panel discussions. My story became a case study not just in revenge, but in the deeper wound of being unheard, underestimated, and then exploited. I was invited onto a live-streamed debate about intellectual integrity, where the host asked, "What made you fight back publicly instead of privately?" I answered without hesitation, because silence is where injustice survives. But not everyone saw it that way. Some thought I had gone too far, that exposing Logan so publicly was vindictive. Even a few family members started calling me dramatic, saying I had shamed him unnecessarily, that I should have dealt with it within the family, that I had embarrassed them. One aunt emailed me a long message that ended with, "This could have been handled with grace." I didn't reply. What grace had they shown me when I was invisible at every family gathering, when they praised Logan's every achievement and ignored my existence? Still, it wasn't the criticism that got to me. It was the silence from Logan himself. Not an apology, not a justification, not a word. It was like he had disappeared entirely. No calls, no messages. Just nothing. I kept working. I poured myself into my next installation, this time a physical one. A gallery space filled with mirrored walls and sensors that triggered projections of whispered dialogue from real stories users submitted. Things they wished they had said to their families. Confessions they never got to make. Forgiveness they never received. The exhibit was called The Unsaid. I didn't include my name anywhere inside, just the work, the voices, the rawness. The opening night was packed. People moved through the space slowly, some crying, some whispering to the walls, some simply standing still. At the center was a single empty chair beneath a spotlight. No plaque, no instructions, just a place to sit. By the end of the night, it had barely been empty for more than a few seconds. I stayed until everyone left, then sat in the chair myself. I closed my eyes. I didn't expect to feel so tired, but there it was. Years of survival finally slowing down into something resembling peace. But peace is never permanent when your past hasn't finished speaking. 2 days later, Logan showed up at my apartment. No warning, just a knock at the door. I opened it to find him standing there in a button-down shirt that looked more wrinkled than I'd ever seen it. He looked smaller somehow, like someone who had been living inside a storm. "I thought you moved back to Charleston," I said. He shook his head. "I needed to talk to you first." I didn't say anything, just stepped aside and let him in. We sat at opposite ends of my couch. The silence was thick, but this time it wasn't unfamiliar. It felt like every unspoken thing between us had finally decided to press against the walls of the room. "I screwed up," he said. I didn't respond. "I saw what you built," he continued, "and I saw how people responded to it. Not just the apps, but the story behind them. I thought, maybe I could understand it if I tried to build something like it. Maybe if I borrowed the tools, I could finally feel what it was like to create something meaningful." I turned toward him. "You didn't borrow. You stole. You tried to sell pain you never lived through." He flinched. "I know. I didn't get it until I played through your app again. Not as your brother, just as a user. And I realized I was the voice that talked over the main character every time. I was the one who dismissed her. And when she stopped speaking, I didn't even notice." Tears welled up in his eyes. For a moment, I felt something twist inside me. Not forgiveness, but recognition. The boy I'd grown up with, who had once been my best friend before he became my competition, before our parents shaped us into symbols of success and disappointment, was finally speaking for himself. "I'm sorry, Ashley," he said. "Not just for the pitch. For everything. For all the years I stood in the way instead of beside you. It was the apology I thought I'd wanted for so long." And yet, sitting there, I realized something important. Apologies can be sincere, even transformative, but they don't fix what's already burned. They don't rewrite history. They don't erase the nights I spent wondering why I wasn't enough. They don't undo the silence that raised me. "I appreciate that," I said, "but I'm not interested in rebuilding anything." He nodded slowly. I figured. I just needed to say it. We didn't hug. We didn't promise to stay in touch. He left quietly, and I watched him walk down the street, his figure dissolving into the crowd. And with every step he took, I felt something heavy lift from my shoulders, not because things were mended, but because I had chosen not to carry his guilt anymore. The following week, I received an unexpected package. No return address, just a carefully wrapped box. Inside was an old sketchbook, my sketchbook, the one I had lost when I moved out at 19. Tucked between the pages was a note in my father's handwriting. "Found this in the attic. I think it's yours. I never looked inside until now. I wish I had. Your mother read the article. She's proud of you. I don't know how to say it better than that." It was the closest thing to acknowledgement I would ever get from him. It didn't feel like a grand gesture. It felt like a whisper. But that was enough. I reopened the sketchbook and flipped through the pages, each one filled with clumsy lines and bold dreams, characters I never finished, interface ideas scribbled in the margins, little drawings of our family dinner table, with me always sitting a little outside the frame. Now I was in the frame. Not because someone else put me there, because I built the frame myself. I scheduled a talk at my old college, not a lecture, a conversation. I wanted to speak directly to the students like me, the overlooked, the dismissed, the ones who felt their voice didn't matter. I told them what no one had told me. You don't need permission to be powerful. You don't need applause to be valid. And you don't need your family's understanding to create something that changes lives. At the end of the talk, a student raised her hand. She looked nervous. "Do you believe in revenge?" she asked. I paused. The word had followed me for years. I had tasted it, wielded it, lived in its shadow. "I believe in justice," I said, "and sometimes justice feels a lot like revenge. But the difference is, justice builds something new. Revenge just watches it all burn." The room fell silent. I smiled. "Sometimes, though," I added, "you need a little fire to clear the ground." The weeks following my talk at the college passed like chapters being written in real time. Everything was moving. My career, my community, the public conversation I had unintentionally ignited. And yet, I felt still inside, like I had finally stepped into the center of who I was supposed to be. It was a strange kind of calm, a quiet power I hadn't known existed. People always assumed peace came when everything around you slowed down. But for me, peace was moving forward and not looking over my shoulder anymore. Invitations kept coming in, exhibitions, podcast features, a partnership with a mental health foundation to create immersive therapy tools using augmented reality. But I was selective now. I wasn't chasing everything. I had nothing left to prove. Instead, I focused on what felt real. I started mentoring young women in design, especially those who had been told their stories didn't matter. We didn't just talk about design, we talked about trauma, voice, visibility. We sat in circles and created not only projects, but space for each other. One of the girls in my mentorship group, Sienna, was only 17. She came from a small town in Georgia where her family believed art was a waste of time. Her father had once burned one of her sketchbooks in front of her. She carried that memory like a scar. When she showed me her first project, a digital storybook with broken images that slowly healed as the reader clicked through moments of kindness, I cried in front of her, not because of what it was, but because of who she was becoming. She wasn't waiting for the world to make space. She was carving it out with trembling hands and bold strokes, just like I had. I started seeing my past in people everywhere, in coffee shop workers with notebooks, in teenage girls sketching in the corners of libraries, in tired single mothers attending night classes to learn coding. I no longer saw myself as the girl who had to scream into silence to be heard. I was now someone who could open doors quietly, someone who could create systems, blueprints, models for others to rise through without having to burn themselves down first. But there was one thing left undone. One corner of my life that still felt incomplete: my mother. After the gallery meeting, she hadn't reached out again. No calls, no letters, just the return of my sketchbook through my father, who hadn't spoken a word since. I told myself it didn't matter, that I didn't need anything from her anymore. But the truth? I did. Not for validation, not even for closure. I wanted to see if she could meet me as a person, not a daughter, not a disappointment, just a woman who had survived the life she once built. I wrote her a letter, handwritten, not emailed, not texted, just pen on paper, the way she used to write thank you cards after every holiday. I told her what I'd been doing. I told her about Sienna, about the girls, about the impact. I told her I had learned to be proud of myself without anyone else's permission. But most of all, I told her I hoped she could be proud too, not just of me, but of herself, if she could finally see me clearly. I never expected a reply. 3 weeks passed. Then one afternoon, as I was preparing slides for a talk in Chicago, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find a delivery man holding a package. Inside, wrapped in old tissue paper, was a book. Not just any book. One of my childhood books. An illustrated anthology I had carried everywhere when I was little. The one that first made me fall in love with storytelling through pictures. On the title page, in my mother's cursive handwriting, was a note. I see you now, and I wish I had sooner. Mom! I sat down on the floor and held the book to my chest. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. Life continued. I traveled. I spoke. I created. I listened. One of the most surreal moments came when I was invited to deliver a keynote at a national design summit in New York. The theme was reimagining the future through personal truth. When I stepped onto the stage in front of 1,000 people, I paused and let the silence wash over me. Not long ago, silence had been my enemy. Now it was my power. I opened by telling the audience I was once the girl who wasn't expected to do much, that I was told creativity was a weakness, that emotion would make me unreliable, and that speaking up was a risk. I believed them, I said, until I didn't. That speech was streamed globally. People messaged me from Brazil, Kenya, South Korea, Poland, everywhere. My story was no longer mine. It was a tapestry stitched together with thousands of threads, each person weaving in their own pain and triumph and recovery. One day I got a message from Logan, short, respectful. Heard your talk. Congratulations. You earned every bit of it. No more words, just respect. I mean that. I didn't reply, but I felt a strange peace in knowing the final page of that chapter had been turned. Some stories don't end with dramatic gestures or cinematic reunions. Some end in quiet acknowledgments, in paths that diverge, not in hatred, but in understanding that not every bridge is meant to be rebuilt. That same month, I returned to Charleston, not for family, not for nostalgia, for a new art program being launched in underfunded schools across the city. I had been asked to help lead a mentorship pilot. When I stood in front of a group of students in a high school auditorium just 10 minutes from where I had grown up, I saw so many versions of my younger self, some quiet, some angry, some with blank stares hiding endless dreams. I told them they didn't need to wait for permission to begin, that they didn't have to fit into the shapes others had carved out for them, that the world needed their stories, not perfect, not polished, just true. Afterward, a girl approached me, maybe 15, maybe younger. She whispered, "Do you think someone like me can make something people actually care about?" I bent down slightly to meet her eyes and said, "You already have. You just haven't shown it to the right people yet." And then she smiled. It wasn't big, but it was real. And in that smile, I saw everything I had fought for. Not revenge, not recognition, but a future where no girl like me would have to wonder if she was enough. Years have passed since that first app launched, since the moment Claire turned to me at the dinner table and asked, "Wait, you created that?" Sometimes it feels like it happened yesterday. Other times, it feels like it was a lifetime ago. Because, in many ways, it was. I'm not the same person who walked into that engagement dinner carrying invisible wounds, hoping for scraps of recognition. I don't create for survival anymore. I create because I have something to say. And now, people listen. Third Layer is no longer a studio run out of my apartment. It's a collective now. A place where overlooked voices become the architects of their own narratives. We have writers, developers, sound designers, trauma counselors. Every project we take on starts with a simple question. What truth are you afraid to say out loud? We don't chase trends. We chase truth. And sometimes we chase ghosts. The kind that linger in families, in cultures, in systems designed to silence. The girl who once lived in the corners of holiday photos now travels the world helping others come out of their own shadows. And yet, for all the growth, all the accolades, I've never let go of that younger version of me. The one who used to draw storyboards on napkins because she couldn't afford a sketchbook, who cried alone in her car after every family gathering, who wondered if her words would ever matter to anyone. She's still with me. I carry her. I honor her. Because without her, none of this would have been possible. A few months ago, I was invited to give a talk in Seoul. A major design summit wanted me to speak about using storytelling as emotional restoration. I had never been to South Korea before. Everything was vibrant, alive, humming with potential. I met creators who had stories so deeply buried in societal expectations that they'd never dared say them out loud. I saw my reflection in them. I saw our shared history of silence and the ways we each broke through it. And when I stepped on stage, I told them something I wish someone had told me when I was younger. Sometimes your truth will make people uncomfortable, but that doesn't mean you stop telling it. On the flight home, I looked out the window and thought about my parents. My father never wrote again after returning my sketchbook. My mother has reached out a few more times. Small things, cards on my birthday, an email after a big feature. We've had coffee a few times when I visit Charleston, and while it's not a healed relationship, it's an honest one now. She listens more than she speaks. Sometimes that's all I need. Sometimes that's all she has to give. Logan and I haven't spoken since his last message. I see updates here and there. A job change on LinkedIn. A birthday post from one of his friends. I don't feel anger anymore. I feel distance. And peace. We had a reckoning, and now we've chosen our paths. His is quiet. Mine is full of sound. We don't need to walk them together. Claire, however, has stayed in my life. She's one of the strongest, most intuitive women I've ever met. Her mental health nonprofit is thriving, and I continue to collaborate with her on initiatives centered around storytelling and emotional accessibility. We don't talk much about the past. We don't need to. The work we do now is rooted in who we've become, not who we were, and that's enough. One project we launched recently is called First Voice. It's a digital archive that allows users to record and share the first time they ever spoke up for themselves. The recordings are anonymous, but the impact is real. Listening to someone recount the moment they told their parents they didn't want to be a lawyer, or the first time they said no to someone who always said yes for them, it's transformative. We've collected over 10,000 stories so far. Every one of them is a victory. I listen to at least one every morning before I start my day. It grounds me, reminds me that I'm not alone, that this isn't just about me anymore. And yet, I still create for myself. Late at night, when the world is quiet, I still sketch. Not for clients, not for campaigns, just for me. Sometimes I draw scenes from memories I've never spoken of, like the time I won an art contest in middle school and my mother forgot to attend the award ceremony. Or the way my brother's name was always the Wi-Fi password in our house, but never mine. Little things. Tiny fractures. I don't need to share those with anyone, but I draw them. I give them shape. I give them a place to exist. Because art isn't just about being seen. It's about seeing yourself. One evening, I received a package in the mail with no name on it. Inside was a small wooden box with a single item, an old cassette tape. Attached to it was a note in a familiar, uneven handwriting. Found this in your grandmother's attic. Thought you might want it. I borrowed an old tape player from a neighbor and sat cross-legged on the floor to listen. It was my voice. A tiny version of me, maybe 6 or 7 years old, narrating a story into a recorder. A story I had made up on the spot. My words were awkward, my grammar messy, my tone full of excitement. I described a girl who lived in a silent town where no one listened to her, until one day she found a mirror that could speak. And in that mirror, she discovered she had a voice that could shake the earth. I cried for a long time, not because it was poetic, but because even then I knew. Even then I understood what it meant to be unseen, and I had already begun to fight my way out. The world is loud now, full of stories of people rising, of voices that were once whispers now becoming thunder. I'm just one among many. But that's the beauty of it. I don't need to be the loudest anymore. I just need to keep speaking. And if you're hearing this, if you're reading this, if your heart's beating a little faster and something inside you is saying, "This is me," then you already know. Your story matters. Your truth matters. Even if no one's listening yet. Especially if no one's listening yet. Because that's where all the best stories begin. In the quiet. In the doubt. In the invisible lines you draw in secret, hoping someday someone will see them. I see them. I see you. And I believe in the fire you carry. Thank you for walking this journey with me. My name is Ashley Bennett, and I was never nothing. I was always becoming something that couldn't be ignored. Have you ever felt like your voice didn't matter? Like you were speaking in a room that never heard you? If this story reminded you of your own journey, share your experience in the comments below. You're not alone, and your story deserves to be told. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories about reclaiming your voice, rising through silence, and turning pain into power. Share this with someone who's still fighting to be seen. And remember, you don't need permission to matter. Sometimes the most powerful transformation starts the moment you decide to stop shrinking and finally step into your truth. Thank you for listening to my story. And never forget, you are always enough.